So there's a lot of talk, if you've been paying attention, about the crisis among young men in this country. And I guess since I'm 46, one benefit to that is I'm definitely not considered a young man anymore. But I really think it should be clarified, and people should be saying a crisis among young white men, because for many, 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 many decades, there were crises among many groups of men in this country, and their crises were often criminalized. So I think now, after a black president from 2008 to 2016, and two women getting major party nominations since then, it's really a crisis among young white men. That's not to say there aren't men of all stripes who, for genuine reasons or just artificial misogynistic reasons, feel marginalized as well. But really, this sensation and this Trump phenomenon is really a symptom of a crisis among young white men. And the question really is it mental? Is it real? Or is it a combination of both? And I'd say it's a combination of both, because obviously you don't want to say that people on an individual level are not experiencing hardship and loss and things like that. But on the macro level, I think it's much more of a mental issue, where, having been the dominant sort of societal predator for so long, seeing other people get opportunities feels like a loss. Ignoring the fact that those people were told, whether it's women, black men, immigrants, gay people, etc., were told, pick yourself up by your bootstraps. Stop complaining, stop asking for special rights, which were really just rights. And those groups, in many cases, whether it be in business, in law, in tech, in sports, in entertainment, a whole variety, were basically told, here's some lemons. And when they made incredible lemonade, um, I would say in some ways, peaking with the presidency, a lot of people started saying, hey, why is your lemonade so good? Why have you been given this special lemonade? I want lemonade. Give me your lemonade. And they elect somebody like Donald Trump, who will take it from other people and then proclaim it the birthright of people that he likes and looks like. Now, I think there are people in this space who are, I think, genuine and good people and have real ideas, like Scott Galloway. I've heard him speak about, how it's become okay to sort of not just ignore the plight of young boys. He really doesn't specify as often white boys, but he does sometimes, and how it's become okay to sort of demonize them in general. And if it was this, if the things that were being said about white men or white boys were being said about other groups of people, whether it be women or other non-white men, there'd be outcry. And I think he's right in terms of a social media space and in a protest space. But on a policy level, let's look. Donald Trump is undoing so many things that will affect young boys. Most of them will not be white. Some of them will be. When it comes to Medicaid, there's plenty of white people on Medicaid. There's plenty of people who suffer without food stamps. It's not just the stereotypes in everybody's mind, which I think helps facilitate the Republicans' march to eliminating the welfare state, which is to kind of create an image of it's lazy Democrats, right? So, like, you're a hardworking white guy, you don't have to worry. Or you're a hardworking guy selling out your demographic to support Trump. You're on the right side. And I think somebody like Galloway would probably say, well, we have Trump in part because we ignored young men and young white men. But I would also say, at what point do you not negotiate with terrorists? Like January 6th, or sexual violence, or Proud Boys, or militia groups. At what point do you say, well, okay, how much can we concede to people who seem to not hold the liberal aims, and I don't mean liberal politically, but the liberal aims of America? How far do you go to where you say, oh, I'm sorry, do you need a president who's a straight man who likes MMA and talks shit and doesn't respect other people? Do you need that? Well, then we need to find a way to communicate with those people. I don't think so. I don't think you negotiate terrorists when it comes to the foundation and the soul of your country. And if January 6th is not a moment where we say, well, a lot of white men felt ignored, and he's doing so well among young white men, that's a failure of parenting, I think, first and foremost. But obviously, when it's young white men, it's got to be the failure of the country. When it's any other demographic, it's a failure of values. And we've seen that throughout history. And you don't have to look too far. You see the opioid crisis. Look at how that was treated compared to the crack epidemic. In fact, the opioid crisis and the crack epidemic. It wasn't the crack crisis. and the opioid, epidemic. I think that's just a way that the framing of these issues, the criminalization of one and the sympathy and outpouring to the other speaks volumes. I'm not the first person. I'm not the 100th person to point that out. But I just think we are at this point where it's like, how far do you go till you say, you know what, young white men, so you like MMA, you like the hypermasculinity, you like the cartoonish exaggeration of masculinity that Donald Trump tries to exhibit and promotes. I mean, he wears lifts, he's out of shape, he wears makeup, but I guess somewhere in there he represents masculinity to you. How far do you go till you say, you know what, there has to be a stop sign where we say, yeah, at this line, we can't keep meeting you just to make you feel better about you being uncomfortable with other people making gains. Okay? I just think we're at this point now where it's got to be like the coalition has to grow. Democrats have to, I guess, yeah, I'm not a big, Democrats are terrible at messaging, et cetera. I mean, Trump, all he does is lie, but apparently that's good messaging. The truth is not as good a messenger as a sexy lie. But at this point, there has to be we have to build the coalition. And basically you say, hey, Trump loving young white men. At some point, the vibes thing has to stop, and you have to start looking at data and facts and not just, I blame this, that, and the other. Take some of your own advice, the advice that was fucking spoon-fed and force-fed to every other community. What about you picking yourself up by your own bootstraps? What about you? And like I said, individually, of course, everybody's situation is different. This isn't to say that the problems individually of people are not real. But in the aggregate, you can't operate a country successfully on the hurt feelings of people living a racist delusion. At some point, you have to face facts and be like, yeah, other people deserve a shot too. And oddly enough, suppressing those people, women didn't have riots, okay? They had their talents suppressed for generations, and when they got the opportunity, now they dominate law schools more than men. And I think that's just one example of that. You can't suppress people and then when they thrive, be mad that they're thriving and say, we want to take back the avenues that led to your success. And that seems to be what we're doing as a country, and that seems to be what Trump is doing, and it seems to be working for people. But I think to ignore the fact that what Trump is doing is going to impact young men. He's just not, Trump can go to an MMA show where tickets are $300 and $500 a pop, and people make a big show of that being like, look, he's speaking to men. That's important that Democrats do that. But is he speaking to men when he cuts off food stamps where young men might be going hungry? Teenage boys that maybe don't look like the MMA attendees are going hungry, or that when they can't afford health insurance or get counseling or this and that because they no longer have Medicaid. These are just, but that's not what people think of. They think of the high profile social media young men who love the masculinity of Trump and sort of, don't want to exhibit classic masculinity, which, all those, maybe it's a myth, an American myth, but all those old timey images of real white male American masculinity, it wasn't just being strong and having a gun either. It was keeping your word. It was taking care of your family. It was doing all these other things. It was being a strong but silent type. And it seems like none of those are required under this new vision of we must help the young boys. And like I said, the young white boys. It's the same way people will say, don't draw a cartoon of Muhammad. You know what'll happen if you do that. And yet in this country, like so many hypocrisies, we now have to tiptoe around and really cultivate the feelings and successes of young white men who statistically are still doing great comparatively to other people. They're just not doing as great. So we have to make sure we handle them with kid gloves. Now, remember, we don't give special rights to anybody, even when we're just giving basic civil rights to gay people, black people, immigrants, etc. We don't give any special rights, but we do have to make sure that the white boys have exactly the rights that they feel they deserve. Not the ones they're guaranteed to by the Constitution, but we need to do a little extra. We need to, the same way world leaders. I mean, it's a perfect symbiosis because Look at how world leaders talk about Trump. That should be embarrassing to alpha males and young men. They talk about him like he's, and I mean no disrespect to this, but it is embarrassing when a president is spoken of like he's a child with special needs. And other countries, they're like, when you go in, be sure to compliment him first and tell him what a beautiful house he has or how well designed things are, and that he's a very big, strong leader and that the world is taking notice. And maybe I shouldn't have said special needs, maybe just like a child, like a rich child, like a spoiled child. I think that's a better analogy. My apologies. Talk to him like a spoiled child, or a boy prince, like Joffrey on Game of Thrones, like be very respectful or he will behead you. And somehow that's masculinity, like beating up on weaker people, abusing your power. And by the way, the self-enrichment, the bribery, the grifting is off the charts. Apparently, so if that's the measure of masculinity, now, if Donald Trump is what young men need, and young white men in particular, then fuck them. That can't be a place we go. There has to be a stop sign before then where we say, well, you know what? We're going to help advance the nation for everybody. And hopefully one day you wake up, maybe you get maturity, maybe you realize Trump was full of shit, whatever the case may be, or you realize, hey, the enemy is not the Democrats, it's either the Republicans, or it's my boss, or it's my greedy landlord, or whoever the case may be. You have to wake up at some point and say, hey, you know what? It takes a real man to say I was wrong. Once again, that's one of those masculinity traits that somehow got lost in the new Trump manhood 2.0. But hey, I was wrong. And I can say I'm wrong. And I see now there's a different way. There's a better way. And it's not in a faux, aggressive, cartoonish, bigoted masculinity. And I feel like that I'm not saying that the Scott Galloways of the world are wrong entirely, but there is this kind of, we must capitulate and figure out a way to get them, maybe setting an example, maybe, some people will resent success and not want to join, but some people might actually see, hey, I was lied to, I was deceived. Real masculinity isn't what Trump is selling. That's bullshit. And hopefully maturity grows some of these people out of it. But this whole idea of just kind of kowtowing to, what are we going to do for young white men? We've got to get them back. It's unbelievable. We're losing them. Some of them might be lost, and some of them might have gone off on their own. Maybe we didn't lose them. Maybe they decided to leave. And there is a difference. There is a difference between like, oh yes, all the wokeness and all this. You know what? I've already given all the reasons why Donald Trump, whether you think Democrats are the answer or not, and this is not me saying Democrats are perfect, what? But if you think Democrats are wrong, well, Donald Trump isn't the answer. So I can sympathize with people who are looking for a third way, but if you go down the path of Donald Trump, that's not a path that I think we need to meet you on. We need to set our boundaries, our goals, our principles within reason and try to make it a welcoming place for some people to come back to. But if we're trying to win back the Trump young white male voter, since when do political parties have to win elections unanimously? You need to just win over people who are winnable. And I'm not sure they're winnable, and I'm not sure their values and what they stand for, at least at this time, are things we should be going to try and win over. So that's been this week's rant. So hope you enjoyed it. Rain on Your Parade coming back in June, guaranteed. That's my podcast for those of you who don't know, audio and video product. So June, it'll be back. Thanks.